Tonight, beneath a sky that seems to drift a little slower than the rest of the world, the Moonlight Reverie settles into its familiar hush. A pale silver glow lingers along the edges of the clouds, and the quiet of evening spreads like a soft blanket across everything it touches. Within this gentle stillness, I'm here with you once more. My name is Noah Miles, and I'll be the voice carrying this night forward steady, warm, unhurried, like a lantern held just above a path where the air moves softly and nothing asks to be rushed. Stories always change inside this dreamlike place. They stretch, unfurl, breathe deeper. Even the old tales, the ones we think we already know, take on a new kind of glow when held beneath moonlight. Tonight, an ancient figure of winter shaped over centuries, carried across seas, kept alive by memory and wonder, will drift quietly into the room we're sharing now. His story is woven with candlelit windows, snowy rooftops, ships crossing distant coasts, and the laughter of children who once waited for footsteps they never truly heard. Wherever you may be listening from, a quiet city corner, a countryside room touched by cooler air, or a small space where the night feels close, this is our place for a while. A place where history softens, time slows, and imagination becomes gentle enough to fall asleep beside. Snow drifts gently against the windows of a quiet house, moving with the kind of softness that only appears on nights when the world seems to breathe a little slower. Inside, lantern warm light settles in soft pools along the wooden floor, and the corners of the room glow with the gentle gold of a low, steady fire. The air carries a faint hush, the sort that wraps itself around everything, softening each movement, smoothing each passing moment. Here, in this small, warm space, the evening has begun to weave its own calm spell. A chair sits near the hearth, its fabric warmed by the fire, and upon it rests a thick wool blanket, folded with the care of someone who likes the room to feel lived in but never cluttered. Shadows move in soft patterns across the walls as the flames stir. Nothing feels hurried. Nothing feels demanding. Time seems to stretch, uncoiling itself like a ribbon caught in a gentle breeze. The quiet isn't empty. It's filled with the faint crackle of burning wood and the nearly imperceptible whisper of snow brushing against the glass. Near the far side of the room, a child sleeps in a small bed, breaths rising and falling in slow, peaceful rhythms. The blankets puff lightly with every exhale. A wooden toy train rests beside the pillow, its paint chipped from years of affectionate hands. The soft rise and fall of the child's chest is steady, as though even dreams have chosen to move slowly tonight, drifting through that tender space where everything feels safe and warm. Across the room, a group of adults speak in hushed voices, careful not to disturb the quiet. Their conversation rises and falls like gentle waves, never sharp, never hurried. Someone mentions a memory from years ago, and the others smile, their voices dipping into that familiar tone shared by people who have carried the same stories for a long time. The firelight touches their faces with a mellow, golden glow, smoothing each line, softening each expression. Eventually, the conversation settles on a figure who has lived for centuries in winter tales, a figure as familiar as the crackle of the hearth, as comforting as the scent of pine even before his name is spoken. The thought of him begins to fill the room with a quiet warmth, as though he himself has slipped into the story, forming gently in the air. The adults recall how they once waited for the sound of distant bells, how they believed footsteps might land softly on snowy rooftops, and how a simple story could turn a winter night into something shimmering with possibility. The room grows still, as if listening. The fire lowers its voice. A strand of smoke rises steadily, curling into the dim amber light above. The adults lean back into their chairs, their memories carrying them to winters far away, where stockings were hung with great care, where the world outside the window looked like a scene brushed in silver, and where a mysterious visitor travelled quietly through the night. The child stirs slightly in sleep, rolling onto one side. A small sigh escapes, barely audible, somewhere inside that dream world. Perhaps an image flickers, a figure bundled in fur, a sleigh gliding over snow, a glow that seems to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The memory of wonder flows gently through the room, linking child and adult alike in its soft, unbroken thread. This night, wrapped in stillness, begins to echo with the stories spoken by generations long gone, stories told beside fireplaces like this one, in houses warmed by wooden stoves, on nights where winter stretched deep into the dark and every sound felt softer. They spoke of a traveller who moved quietly through the cold, who carried gifts not only in his hands, but also in the way he made the darkest season feel bright and full and kind. A sense of peaceful expectancy settles into the space, as though the house itself remembers these tales. The windows glow faintly with reflected lantern light. The snow outside thickens its gentle fall, each flake drifting downward with a patience shaped by the moon. And in this quiet, time seems to fold slightly, the present brushing against the past. The figure spoken of in the room, the one whose story spans oceans, continents, and countless winters waits just beyond the next chapter of this night. His story is not a single strand, but a tapestry woven from centuries of generosity, imagination, and the quiet hope that brightness can always find its way through the cold. As the fire breathes softly and the shadows rock in slow motion along the walls, the story prepares to open its first true page, the page where an ancient figure steps into the light. Not as a myth, not as a whisper, but as the beginning of a long journey through the heart of winter, far from the quiet house where snow leans tenderly against the windows. Another landscape begins to unfold, a place warmed by southern sun, where the air carries the scent of the sea and the days stretch long beneath pale blue skies. The land curves gently along the Mediterranean coast, its hills soft with olive groves, its stone towns gathered close to the earth in muted shades of sand and clay. In this warm and ancient world, centuries before, winter folklore would spread across continents. A different kind of story takes its first breath. It begins with a boy born around the year 280 in a region that would one day be known as Turkey. His childhood is shaped by quiet courtyards, shuttered windows, and the hum of marketplaces where voices rise and fall like distant waves as he grows. What sets him apart is not strength or stature, but a kind of steady-hearted generosity, a disposition that makes him listen closely, act quietly, and give without expectation. The world around him is full of hardship, and those who struggle seem drawn to the calm that lingers in his presence. As the years pass, a young man becomes a bishop, known simply as Nicholas of Myra. Travellers speak of him with a tone half softened by respect, half brightened by gratitude. Stories ripple through the towns along the coast, stories of a man who walks long distances under the heat of the sun to tend to the poor, who uses his inheritance not to build comfort around himself, but to lift the burdens of others. Some tales say he moved through the world with purposeful steps, often arriving just in time to ease hunger, to soothe illness, or offer a kindness that would ripple forward long after he left. Sailors along the coast begin to whisper his name with admiration, calling him a guardian of those who brave the sea. Parents tell children about the bishop who protects the vulnerable, who understands the quiet fears felt most acutely by the young. These stories grow gently, without need for embellishment. They travel from one fishing village to the next, carried by salt air and the slow-moving rhythm of trade across the Mediterranean. Over time, Nicholas's humility becomes legend, so much so that when he passes from the world, his memory continues to travel through it with unchanged warmth. The church marks the anniversary of his death, December 6th, as his feast day, and in the generations that follow, people begin to honour him by giving small gifts to children. The gesture is simple, but it carries the weight of centuries of gratitude in towns where winters are mild and nights come early. Lanterns glow softly in windows as families place fruit, coins, or small tokens inside shoes left out for the kindly bishop whose footsteps may yet linger in the quiet hours. As centuries roll forward, mysteries begin to form around him. Some believe that his remains were carried across the sea by Italian sailors and sheltered in a basilica on the coast of Bari. Pilgrims visit the site, gathering in echoing aisles lit by soft candlelight, tracing their hands over cool stone that has held centuries of devotion. Others hold that different resting places exist, each claimed with tender certainty by local tradition. These fragments of uncertainty do nothing to diminish the affection felt for him. Instead, they lend a gentle shimmer to his story, allowing imagination and reverence to weave together in a way that feels timeless. In the 20th century, a facial reconstruction crafted by an anthropologist brings Nicholas's image into the modern world. The effort reveals a man with Mediterranean features, olive-toned skin, thoughtful brown eyes, and a nose once broken, a detail that hints at a life touched by struggle as much as compassion. The result looks nothing like the rounded, jolly figure who will one day appear in snowy scenes and festive decorations. Instead, it reflects a lean, earnest man whose expression carries a quiet fierceness shaped by duty and conviction. This contrast between the historical bishop and the beloved winter icon marks the beginning of the long transformation his memory will undergo. Yet at the heart of both figures lies a common thread, a steady devotion to kindness, a desire to bring comfort where it is most needed, and a spirit that moves through the world without seeking recognition. These qualities become the foundation upon which countless generations will build, adding warmth upon warmth, story upon story, until the humble bishop from the sunlit coast stands at the center of winter celebrations across the world. In the centuries ahead, his image will soften, shift, and gather new shapes. But here, in this early chapter, Nicholas remains simply a man walking dusty paths under bright southern skies, offering generosity as naturally as breathing. His legacy moves quietly through time, preparing for the moment when it will step into colder landscapes, meet traditions shaped by snow and firelight, and begin its long journey toward becoming the winter figure known and cherished by millions. As centuries drift onward, the warm Mediterranean world that cradled Nicholas begins to fade into the soft haze of distant memory, and new landscapes rise gently into view. These are northern places, shaped by colder winds and long winter nights, where forests breathe with slow shadows and rooftops collect blankets of frost that sparkle beneath pale morning light. Here, far from the sunlit stones of Myra. Stories continue to evolve in the hands of people who have never seen the bishop's homeland, yet feel his presence in the way their winters glimmer with quiet hope. In the heart of Europe during the Renaissance, Nicholas is already beloved, though his face has been reshaped by the imaginations of those who have only ever known him through stories whispered in candlelit rooms. Artists paint him with flowing beards, wise eyes, and heavy robes that ripple like clouds of wool. Some depictions lean toward solemnity, others toward gentle strength. None truly resemble the lean Mediterranean bishop of centuries past, and yet each version carries the same steady warmth. As winter traditions take root across Europe, Nicholas becomes a figure not only of generosity but also of reassurance. In cold months, when days shorten early and nights stretch long over fields and villages, his presence feels like a lantern carried through darkness. Parents speak of him with reverence, and children listen with wide, shining eyes. His feast day, the 6th of December, grows into a cherished moment of the season. Shoes are left out by doorways, filled come morning with fruit, nuts, and small gifts meant to echo the bishop's quiet generosity. But time, ever shifting, brings great changes. The Protestant Reformation sweeps across the continent, reshaping spiritual life with a firm and determined hand. Many reformers, wishing to draw attention away from the veneration of saints, seek to reduce the prominence of Nicholas, yet the affection that people hold for him does not fade. Traditions, especially those tied to home and winter, tend to cling gently to memory. And so his legacy bends rather than breaks, adapting to the new landscape without losing its heart. In some regions, gift-giving slowly migrates away from early December and settles into Christmas itself, guided by the efforts of religious leaders who wish to center the holiday on the Christ child, the Christ kind. This luminous figure becomes the new bearer of gifts in many places. Imagined as a child wrapped in radiant light or soft golden cloth, his presence is peaceful, pure, ethereal. Yet the Christ-kind cannot carry the quiet authority Nicholas once held, especially in households where children have grown up hearing stories of a kindly bishop who walked the earth with steady purpose. To fill the gap, winter folklore begins to develop companions, sturdy figures who echo aspects of the old saint. In German-speaking regions, names like Ruklaus, Aschenklas, and Pelsnickel appear, shaped from a blend of old customs and lingering affection. These characters are not harsh but firm, balancing kindness with a sense of responsibility. Their imagery carries traces of wood smoke, wool cloaks, and the deep forests of Central Europe. They may carry switches as symbols of caution, though the discipline they represent is gentle compared to darker tales told in the more remote mountains in England, where the Reformation's influence is also strong. A different figure rises to prominence. Father Christmas, a jovial emblem of feasting, hospitality, and seasonal cheer, begins to appear in plays, broadsheets, and celebrations. He is not yet a bringer of gifts, but rather a spirit of merriment, large in stature, robed in green or scarlet, crowned with ivy or holly. His laughter is warm, his presence comforting, his message simple. Let winter be a time of gathering and goodwill. As generations pass, the lines between these figures begin to soften. Nicholas remains, sometimes in the background, sometimes at the center, depending on the region and the era. The Chris kind brings heavenly radiance. The rustic, fur-clad companions lend sturdiness to the season. Father Christmas offers joy and a sense of home. Together, these characters create a mosaic of winter, each shaping the next chapter of a tradition that refuses to disappear. Through all these transformations, Nicholas' generosity remains the heart of the story. His memory, carried by songs, paintings, and quiet domestic rituals, adapts seamlessly to different lands, from snow-laden Germany to the green countryside of England, without losing its essence. And as winter continues to wrap itself around villages, towns, and cities, the figure who began as a humble bishop slowly gathers new attributes: a fuller beard, a heavier cloak, a deeper connection to the hearth and the quiet corners of the cold season. Each variation brings him closer to the figure the world will one day recognize instantly: a man of winter, shaped by centuries of devotion and imagination. But for now, in this stage of his journey, he remains many figures at once, drifting between traditions like a soft current moving beneath the surface of history, patiently waiting for the moment when all these strands will weave together into a single, familiar silhouette. Across the wide Atlantic, where waves roll in slow, moonlit patterns, and the horizon seems to stretch forever, another chapter of the winter story begins to take shape. The centuries that shaped Nicholas into a beloved figure across Europe gradually give way to a new world, one still young in identity, still forming its own rhythms and celebrations. The air along the eastern coast of this land carries a different kind of cold, sharper, clearer, and the settlements that rise there are small clusters of wooden homes pressed gently against vast forests and open fields. Into this new world come families from the Netherlands, carrying with them traditions wrapped carefully in memory foods they once shared on winter nights. Songs sung softly beside dim lanterns, and stories passed from parent to child with a sense of both comfort and delight. Among these cherished traditions travels a name that feels familiar, yet slightly altered by distance: Santa Claus. He arrives not by ship in any literal sense, but through language, through ritual, through the tiny details that make a holiday feel whole. Life in the American colonies is far from the cozy winter celebrations that once filled Dutch homes. Winters can be bitter, and communities are scattered by the demands of new land. Christmas itself does not yet settle into the warm, glowing shape it holds in later centuries. For some colonists, especially those carrying stern Puritan beliefs, the season is treated not as a time for celebration, but as a period of restraint. For others, Christmas becomes a rowdy gathering, marked more by boisterous festivity than gentle tradition. Within this unsettled landscape, Santa Claus does not disappear. Instead, he finds quiet pockets where his memory continues to shine. Newspaper articles from the 1,770 seconds make brief, almost delicate mentions of families who still honour St. Nicholas Day. These families place small gifts in stockings or shoes, just as their parents and grandparents did in the old world. The customs are modest, often observed in the privacy of home, but they are enough to keep the familiar warmth alive during cold winters. As the colonies grow and cities like New York begin to take shape, these old traditions start finding new corners in which to bloom. In 1804, members of the New York Historical Society receive small woodcut prints during their annual gathering images, depicting Santa Claus hanging stockings near a hearth. His figure surrounded by fruits, toys, and the gentle domestic glow of a winter household. These moments, quiet as they are, help lay the foundation for something much larger. It is during this time that a writer named Washington Irving begins weaving a playful, satirical history of New York under the pen name Dietrich Knickerbocker. In this warm, humorous work, he names St. Nicholas the patron saint of the city. The tone is light, the intention comedic, yet the effect reaches far beyond jest. Irving's depiction breathes new life into the winter figure, giving Santa Claus a foothold in American imagination. His version of the saint becomes a gentle nod to community identity, a symbol of heritage reshaped with affectionate charm. From these scattered threads, Dutch families, woodcut prints, light-hearted literature, a pattern starts to form. It is subtle at first, like the faint outline of a figure appearing through snowfall. But year after year, the image becomes clearer. The winter visitor who once crossed rooftops in European villages begins to settle into the American landscape here. He is not yet the jolly figure known today. He remains fluid, shifting between descriptions, sometimes taking on a mischievous edge, other times appearing dignified and serene. As the 19th century approaches, a quiet transformation begins to unfold. American households, still searching for traditions that feel distinctly their own, start to build upon the fragments left by Dutch immigrants and European folklore. Stories blend, merge, and soften into one another. The winters grow steadier, the celebrations gentler, and in this slow weaving of cultures, a once distant bishop gradually steps closer to becoming a cherished figure of family-centered joy. Even as he continues to shift in shape and mood, his presence gathers warmth. He becomes a symbol of comfort amid cold evenings, a friendly visitor imagined in the soft glow of oil lamps, a promise of wonder that settles sweetly over long December nights. The journey from Sinterklaas to Santa Claus has only just begun, but already the new world is beginning to carve a place for him, a place built not from grand monuments or strict doctrine, but from hearthlight, storytelling, and the quiet hope that winter can carry its own gentle magic. In the early decades of the 19th century, as cities across the young United States begin to find their rhythm, winter acquires a gentler texture. Streets that were once rugged and uneven grow quieter under layers of snow, and lamplight glows more warmly against brick walls and frosted windows. In these calmer evenings, families gather in the soft hush of parlours warmed by slow-burning stoves, creating a setting in which stories can settle deeply and take root. It's within this environment that a poem, small in scale, private in origin, written for the delight of children, begins a transformation that will ripple through generations. In 1822, a scholar named Clement Clarke Moore composes a verse for his family, never imagining it would leave the intimate circle for which it was intended. The poem carries a playful, twinkling quality, capturing the hush of Christmas Eve with a rhythm that feels like falling snow. At its heart is a visitor who travels silently across rooftops, moving not with solemn dignity or mythic grandeur, but with a spirited, merry charm that feels tender and deeply human. Moore's creation is full of warmth, a man wrapped in fur, his eyes bright with mischief, his laugh soft and round, his gestures filled with affection. A year later, the poem finds its way into the pages of the Troy Sentinel, published anonymously. What begins as a simple gift to children suddenly enters living rooms far beyond Moore's own household. Readers across New York and beyond find themselves enchanted by the gentle magic of its lines. Families read it by lamplight, perhaps repeating certain verses with quiet smiles as the images linger, stockings hung with care, children dreaming in their beds, and a visitor whose sleigh glides across the night without disturbing a soul. The poem, titled A Visit from Saint Nicholas, becomes an annual tradition in many homes. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, it begins to define what American Christmas looks and feels like. Illustrators attempt to capture its descriptions, and children learn its rhythm until the words feel as steady and familiar as the crackle of a hearth. The figure at the poem's center, once fluid, shifting between different European influences, begins to solidify. His coat becomes fur-trimmed. His cheeks glow like winter berries. His belly shakes when he laughs, a detail that seems to bring him to life in a way no earlier depiction ever had. What makes Moore's poem so enduring is the tenderness threaded through every stanza. The visitor is not regal or distant. He is approachable, almost neighborly, carrying a pack of toys slung casually over his shoulder. He moves with a lightness that suggests joy rather than authority. Even the soot on his clothes adds a kind of endearing imperfection, hinting that he has travelled through many chimneys and countless homes filled with sleeping children. And then there are the reindeer, 8 of them, each given a name that dances in the mind like sparks from a fire. Dasher, Dancer, Prancer, Vixen, Comet, Cupid, Donna, Blitzen. Their names fall in a pattern both playful and melodic, shaping an image of a team that moves through the night with cheerful precision for the first time. The winter traveller becomes not just a figure, but part of a small ensemble. His sleigh pulling through the sky with the help of companions who shine as brightly in imagination as he does. The simplicity of the poem belies its impact. It gently shifts Santa still, St. Nicholas in name, at first away from the firm, sometimes stern guardian of European law, and into a figure defined by warmth, light-heartedness, and affection. He becomes round-bodied, jolly, and full of good humour, the very embodiment of winter kindness. Moore's verses create a portrait that illustrations and stories will build upon for decades, each generation adding a touch more colour, more softness, more sparkle. By the 1,840 seconds, newspapers and magazines across the country embrace this newly formed image. Holiday sections begin to feature drawings inspired by Moore's words, a merry old elf with twinkling eyes and rosy cheeks, arriving in the stillness of night to fill stockings and spark dreams. Children repeat the poem aloud with a sense of wonder, and adults find comfort in its steady rhythm, as though it carries the heartbeat of winter itself. in households illuminated by modest tree lights or the glow of a single candle, the poem becomes more than a story. It becomes a ritual, a moment that folds itself gently into Christmas Eve. And with each reading, the winter visitor grows more familiar, not merely a symbol, not merely a tradition, but a figure woven into the quiet fabric of the season. By the time a generation passes, the transformation is complete. The bishop from Myra, the patron saint of sailors and children, the figure reshaped by centuries of European imagination, now wears a new face, one shaped largely by a poem written for the delight of a small circle of loved ones. Under Moore's pen, he has stepped fully into the American winter, becoming a companion to firelit evenings, a cherished presence in snowy towns, and a figure whose gentle joy will carry forward through every decade that follows as the 19th century continues to unfold. The image shaped so tenderly by Clement Clarke Moore's poem begins drifting beyond the boundaries of verse. It finds its way into sketches, engravings, storefront windows, and the minds of artists who look upon the jolly figure and sense a story waiting to be told in colour and line. It is through these artists and through the rise of illustrated publications that the winter visitor begins to take on a form recognisable to modern eyes, settling more firmly into the world, like a familiar silhouette stepping out of soft fog. In the bustling heart of New York, where printing presses rumble through long evenings, a political cartoonist named Thomas Nast turns his attention to the character who has captured so many imaginations. Nast approaches the figure with both reverence and creative freedom, allowing Moore's descriptions to guide him, while also giving the winter traveller a richer world to inhabit. His pencil sketches carry a certain warmth, the curve of a round belly, the brightness in wise eyes, the thick beard that seems to hold the very texture of winter within its curls. Through Nast's illustrations, Santa's clothing becomes more defined, a heavy coat, the fur-lined cuffs, the boots that look well-travelled through snowy nights. His bag of toys grows larger, fuller, its shape shifting with each drawing as though its contents are endless. But perhaps Nast's most enduring contribution is the choice to place Santa's workshop at the far, frozen North Pole. With that single detail, the winter figure gains a home unlike any other, a place of swirling snow, glistening ice, and gentle isolation, far removed from the noise of cities and towns. Nast imagines elves as Santa's helpers, small, cheerful figures with nimble hands and bright expressions, moving through the workshop with the rhythm of a place where time passes slowly and joy is crafted with care. He also sketches Mrs. Claus, giving the winter mythos a quiet, steady companion who adds warmth to Santa's world in her own gentle way. These additions may be products of imagination, yet they feel so natural that they soon become woven tightly into the lore itself. As Nast's illustrations circulate through magazines like Harper's Weekly, families across the nation grow increasingly familiar with this full, vivid image of Santa Claus. Each new drawing adds depth, a glimpse of the workshop, the curve of the sleigh, the glow of oil lamps reflecting on fresh snow. Santa becomes not just a figure who visits homes in the night, but a character with a life, a place where he works, people who assist him, routines shaped by centuries of winter tradition. The growing popularity of Santa's imagery spills into the world of commerce. In 1841, a shop in Philadelphia unveils a life-sized Santa figure, and thousands of children gather to catch a glimpse. The moment is brief, but it hints at something much larger, a future where department stores will transform into winter wonderlands, where Santa will sit in grand chairs beneath sparkling decorations, and where families will wait patiently to see the jolly figure brought to life. As the century marches on, new forms of entertainment take hold. Photography begins to find its place in the world. And then, like a quiet rush of wind, moving pictures appear. In 1898, an actor named Leadham Bantock portrays Santa in one of the earliest films to feature the winter icon. The silent movie, gentle and dreamlike, follows a little girl who drifts into sleep and dreams of Santa's workshop. Though simple in structure, the film captures something precious, a glimpse of the hidden world that children have always imagined but never seen for the first time. Audiences watch the workshop come alive with movement toys crafted by tiny hands, Santa preparing for his journey, and the soft glow of a place touched by enchantment. As the 19th century fades into the next, the winter figure stands fully formed. The poem gave him warmth. Illustrators gave him shape. Filmmakers gave him motion. And the people, families gathering in the hush of December evenings gave him meaning. He becomes a guardian of winter joy, a companion to quiet nights, a symbol that carries the promise that kindness can travel through even the coldest of seasons. What began as the story of a Mediterranean bishop has transformed, through art and imagination, into a figure who lives comfortably in snow-covered scenes. The journey from saint to symbol is nearly complete, though the decades ahead will add their own layers of magic, carrying Santa into a century filled with new technologies, new traditions, and a world eager to hold onto the warmth he brings. As the 20th century unfurls, bringing with it new inventions, new rhythms, and new ways of sharing stories, Santa's familiar silhouette continues to drift gently into the expanding landscape of modern life. The world grows louder in some places, faster in others. Yet, the winter figure manages to move through these changing decades with the same soft presence that first endeared him to families gathered around lamplight and hearth. Each era adds a quiet thread to his tapestry, shaping a figure who remains constant even as the world around him evolves. In cities that begin to glow with electric lights, Santa appears in storefront displays that shimmer with silver tinsel and bright red ribbons. Trains carry families through landscapes dusted with snow, and radios hum with songs that turn December evenings into warm gatherings. In these early decades, his presence in parades and festive events becomes more common, a gentle arrival that brings smiles to sidewalks lined with bundled-up spectators. Yet even as he steps into these public settings, the softness of his legend remains intact, settling over crowds like a pleasant hush. Among the new traditions that emerge in mid-century America, one begins in the most unexpected way. In 1955, a telephone number printed in a newspaper advertisement leads a child, quite unintentionally, not to a festive call center, but to the phone line of a military command center tucked within the quiet expanse of Colorado. A colonel answers, his tone firm at first, trained by duty until he hears the child's trembling voice and realizes the mistake. What follows is a moment both simple and extraordinary. He softens his voice, steps gently into the role the child had hoped to reach, and speaks with the warmth of Santa himself. That night becomes a seed for something delicate and enduring. The command center, eventually known as NORAD, begins sharing gentle, imagined sightings of Santa's journey each Christmas Eve. What could have been a small, isolated accident grows into a beloved tradition carried forward year after year. Radar screens and radio dispatches, tools built for vigilance, add a touch of quiet wonder to the season, allowing children across the world to follow the winter traveler's path in real time. Even as technology advances, satellites gliding through the upper sky and computers humming softly in darkened rooms, the spirit behind the tracker remains tender, a wish to preserve a sense of magic. Around the same time, music lifts Santa's legend into the air. Songs written in warm studios, surrounded by the soft hum of instruments, drift through households during the season. Voices like those of K-Star fill rooms with playful melodies, imagining Santa's arrival with vivid joy. In these recordings, the winter visitor feels both timeless and newly vibrant, a figure whose footsteps might be heard at any moment, if the night is still enough. Books, too, join this gentle expansion. Authors craft tales that imagine Santa's origins, his daily routines, and the quiet relationship he shares with Mrs. Claus. One story paints her as the steady heart of the North Pole, offering warmth and guidance when winter grows deep. Another imagines Santa's home nestled within a valley that echoes with soft laughter. Its hills shaped by drifting snow. These additions, though fictional, blend seamlessly into the broader legend, adding layers of affection without disturbing the core of Nicholas's long journey. In distant corners of the northern world, Canada, Alaska, Greenland, Norway, Finland, communities begin playfully claiming to be Santa's home. Each place brings its own gentle charm forests, thick with evergreens. Villages shaped by warm lights glowing against early sunsets. Coastlines where winter winds sing in soft, steady tones. Some create postal codes designed just for him. Others build small houses where visitors can pause and feel a touch of childhood wonder. These claims are never competitive, never sharp. Instead, they feel like lanterns scattered across the Arctic Circle, each casting its own glow into the long winter nights. Television soon joins the tradition, bringing Santa into living rooms through animated specials, stop-motion stories, and films where snow seems to fall with a softness borrowed from dreams. Children gather to watch reindeer leap across shimmering skies, elves bustling in workshops of glowing wood, and Santa himself moving with calm, familiar joy. These shows become part of holiday rituals. I watched year after year as the decades continue their slow passage. Through all these developments, music, books, broadcasts, technology, Santa remains steady. He is shaped by imagination, refined by time, and carried forward by affection. And though the world becomes more modern, more illuminated, and more connected, the essence of the winter figure does not shift. He is still the quiet bearer of kindness, still the gentle presence who brightens long nights, still the figure who carries echoes of a once humble bishop from a sunlit land far away. As the century progresses, Santa's image gathers its final touches before entering the modern era fully formed. He stands now at the threshold of a world ready to celebrate him not just in song or story, but across continents, a figure woven into the quiet heart of winter itself. The long journey that began in the warm sunlight of the ancient Mediterranean now reaches a place where time moves gently, as though softened by snow. The 20th century grows quieter as it settles into its later decades, and the figure at the heart of this winter tale stands fully gathered from centuries of memory, devotion, and imagination. In this final stretch of his transformation, the world around him has already shaped him into the familiar silhouette known across continents, a figure carried by children's laughter, by old stories retold near amber fires, and by the soft glow of holiday lights lingering in windows, yet Before the story closes, it is worth drifting back through the threads that brought him here. The Bishop of Myra, lean and determined beneath southern skies, lived in a world of stone courtyards and warm breezes. His kindness, offered quietly and without expectation, became the spark that first lit this long journey. From him came the heart of the legend, the impulse to give, to comfort, to protect. The centuries that followed would layer his memory with winter frost, gentle imagination, and shimmering folklore. But the glow at the story's center would remain unchanged. In Europe, his image blended with spirits of the season, with the jovial nature of Father Christmas, with the celestial glow of the Christkind, and with rustic figures wrapped in cloaks of fur. These influences did not compete, but intertwined, each adding a different shade to the portrait. The old world, with its forests, cathedrals, and frost-touched villages, gave Nicholas a deeper connection to winter itself, a shift that would later make his presence feel so natural beneath northern stars. Then came the Atlantic crossing, an ocean wide and shimmering beneath the moon, where Dutch memories carried Santa Claus into the young landscapes of America. There, amid log cabins, early cities, and snowy riverbanks, the figure began to adapt again through the humor of Washington Irving, through the early illustrations offered as seasonal gifts. Santa found his first American shape, one softened by domesticity and affection. Clement Clarke Moore's poem placed him gently in family rooms, walking through stillness with twinkling eyes and a laugh that rose like warm air from a hearth. Thomas Nast then gave him a world of his own, a workshop, companions, a red coat, and a home nestled deep within the quiet majesty of the North Pole. Motion pictures added movement, music added rhythm, and parades added the glow of public celebration. Each generation polished a different facet of the story until the figure stood complete, both timeless and unmistakable. Now, in the modern age, Santa moves not just through chimneys or down snowy lanes, but through glowing screens, postcards, songs, and collective memory. Letters addressed to him travel across oceans. Families in distant countries decorate homes with images of his sleigh. Children trace his route through the soft hum of satellites as NORAD's tracker shows him gliding through the night sky. Countries near the Arctic Circle offer homes for him, places where the air is crisp. The snow drifts high, and the lights of winter flicker gently across the horizon. Though these details vary from place to place, the essence remains steady. The modern Santa is a figure of joy, not judgment. His presence no longer carries the sternness of early winter guardians, but instead the simple warmth of kindness. The lump of coal, once a symbol of caution, has softened into a playful notion, seldom taken seriously. What stays constant is the spirit of giving, the belief that generosity can bloom even in the coldest season. Back in the quiet room where the fire burns low and the night leans softly against the windows, this long history settles like snowflakes drifting to rest. The story, now complete, feels less like a chronicle of dates and transformations, and more like a gentle reminder that goodness, carried carefully across centuries, can take new shapes while keeping its heart untouched. The room grows dimmer. The fire, a pool of amber light, fading into embers. Shadows stretch in long, slow movements across the floor. Somewhere in the distance, whether imagined or remembered, the faint shimmer of bells seems to brush against the silence. A sound light enough to vanish almost as soon as it appears. In this final moment, the figure who has travelled so far stands quietly at the edge of the story, as familiar as a childhood memory, as tender as a winter evening. He exists not just in folklore, nor only in celebration, but in the quiet hope that kindness can return each year with renewed warmth. And as the night settles deeper, that hope remains, glowing softly like the last ember in the hearth, steady, gentle, and enduring.